Hello guys, my name is Carlos and today I'm gonna talk about homosexuality, why it exists, its purpose in evolution, and if it is a learned behavior or an innate thing. All I'm gonna say is proved by theories and hypotheses that are on the way to becoming one of these irreferable theories. This means that this is not going to be about my opinion, this is going to be about proved things. I have to make clear that I'm not gonna talk about other sexual orientations apart from the homosexuality, and it's not because I'm excluding them for any type of discrimination. It's because the most part of the studies about this are centered to homosexuality. With this being said, let's get started. If homosexuality is a genetic thing, how can it still exist if homosexual people rarely beget children? Well, following the theory of evolution, only the genes that help to the reproduction of our species are those which will be perpetuated, and a gene that makes you get away from the organ that allows reproducing doesn't seem like one that will be conserved. So, could we say that homosexuality is something caused by our ambient? Partially. It is very difficult to determine an exact percentage of how much it affects in our sexuality. And science hasn't done successful studies to establishing it. What we know is that environmental and genetic factors affect our sexuality in an unknown percentage. In part, homosexuality comes from environmental factors, but you need to know that in evolutive biology, environmental is all that isn't directly related to genes. With this as a base, this article, one of the first studies that proved the environmental influences on sexuality, found out how women that gave birth to several boys were developing immunity to a certain protein that only men produce when being in the uterus. The thing here is that this immunity increases the probability for the male fetus to be gay just because of how these antibodies interact with its cerebral development. Usually, the younger brother of a family of brothers is the one that ends up being gay. This is because with each pregnancy that the mother has, she gets a higher immunity to the protein. This means that the younger boy is more probable to be gay. This shows us too that we don't choose our sexuality. Chance chooses it for us. And well, this is where the environmental factors end. There are no more proofs of other environmental factors that can affect our sexuality. So then, we can say that an unknown percentage of homosexuality is caused by chemical reactions without an apparent purpose that happen in the pregnancy. This is not an unusual thing. Let's think about it. Our brains were not designed to react like they do to drugs of any type. However, they change us in a really important way. So it's possible that the same happens in the uterus. In the study I just talked about, there are these antibodies that, if not being bad or dangerous for us, will be perpetuated in our evolution. An indirect way of conserving homosexuality in our evolution chain. But now, which are the biological factors? Well, there isn't a specific gene that codifies homosexuality. There are different genes that affect it. Each of those admixes of gender and sexual preferences that makes everyone a unique being. For understanding this, we need to separate the brains by what they are attracted to. What I mean with this is if they are attracted to men or women. In the pregnancy, the ovaries and testicles of a person produce androgens. Then the hormones of the androgens interact with our brain, and depending on the intensity of the exposure, the brain will like women or men, regardless of the sex of the persons. In the pregnancy, the ovaries and testicles of a person produce androgens. Then, these hormones interact with the brain of a fetus, and depending on the intensity of exposure to androgens, the brain will like men or women. The exposure also depends on our androgens receptors. If most of the receptors of the brain are sensitive to androgens, the person will feel attracted to women because of the exposure. If they are not, the person will feel attracted to men because not being exposed to androgens. Now, the sensitive level of our receptors depend on our genes, so that's why it is a biological factor. Knowing this, in the case of bisexuality, we can hypothesize that the exposition to androgens doesn't leave only two possible results. Contrary, it is something gradual, leaving the possibility of liking both sex but also having preference with one of those. All of this is in accordance with the Kinsey scale, which establishes 7 different levels from heterosexuality to homosexuality, passing through bisexuality too. What we usually call heterosexuality or homosexuality would be located in opposite extremes. The Kinsey study received some criticism about its methodology. However, none of these objections have refuted the conclusions obtained by the study. But now let's take a break here. Now I want to give you some anatomic facts that make our bodies seem to be made for bisexuality. As well as I said at the beginning, I'm not gonna give any opinion. It's not about what I think. This is just for you to think about your own conclusions. In men, apart from the typical penis orgasm, there is the prostatic orgasm, which is more difficult to get but also more intense and longer. It is achieved with the stimulation of a certain group of nerve endings located in the main prostate, and seems to have been chosen by the way evolution works for anal penetration. The counterpart on women of these nerve endings is present in the skin glands, which originate from the same embryonic tissue that forms the prostate, and also are responsible for the G-spot in the walls of the vagina. And once again, it produces an intenser and longer orgasm, but difficulter to be produced. Just 1/4 of women get into the orgasm because of vaginal penetration. The other 3 parts need the clitoris to have an orgasm, which is a part that is not used in the heterosexual penetration. So let's sum up. There has been found genes that, to a greater or lesser extent, help the appearance of homosexuality or intermediate sexual preferences, something proved with the studies on twins. But now, which is the purpose of homosexuality in evolution? Why should evolution keep these genes? Different from what I said about the uterus, which could be a coincidence, the existence of these genes can be a causality. There's gotta be something that keeps them there. Because if not, it would have been left in the past by chance and mutations. There are some hypotheses about this, but the following 2 are the most accepted ones. The first one is the kin selection. It is a evolutive strategy that favors the reproductive success of an organism's relatives, even at a cost to the organism's own survival and reproduction. For helping you understand this, an extreme case would be the one of bees colonies, in which the most part of the bees wave to reproduce for the good of colony. And with the same example, we can see that it is a really good strategy. The human is a really social species. Most of us love colonies, and it is possible that evolution has kept the homosexuality for there not to be so many people that use resources on reproduction and can devote them to the community maintenance. The second hypothesis, which doesn't need to exclude the first one, says that the genes of homosexuality give evolutive advantages to those that are most likely to be heterosexual, something that was proved by the study of 2008. Look, the genes that cause homosexuality increased the fertility of women who got them. And the evolution of humanity is not the only one that show homosexual behavior. I say this because there has been seen lots of animals species that show this behavior with purposes in some cases different than ours. This could mean that each species selects its own homosexual genes in function of what they want or need. For example, 1/4 of black swan couples are of male black swans with male black swans. This is because the male black swan couple steal female nest for taking care and breeding the eggs. They do this because the offspring of these couples have a bigger possibility of surviving and reaching adult age because of how strong, robust and territorial the male black swans are. At the end, it becomes a sentimental thing. Male swans are very jealous with their partners, and if a third party mounts its partner, an awful battle starts, and it will probably end with the daring bachelor's death. We've got two the giraffes, in which community it's more normal the homosexual sex than the heterosexual sex. The majority of males, when being involved in neck fights, suddenly start anal penetration with its opponent in the middle of the fight, hypothesizing an evolutive strategy that prevents excessive male deaths for not leaving the species without them. We can talk too about the incredible case of the bottlenose dolphin species, whose flocks, when finding with other flocks, decide to have sex regardless of being male or female before starting a fight with their opponents. This would be considered as bisexuality, not homosexuality. And what about humans? Well, there is really less information and it's difficult to prove any hypothesis because we can't make a laboratory to simulate the thousands and thousands of years that humanity has been living. We are the species with the most complex cognitive structure on Earth, and this whole topic is taboo in a big part of our world. So getting a final conclusion about our sexuality is almost an impossible thing right now. Broadly speaking, homosexuality in humans seems to have a survival role and even increase of productivity in human societies. We need to take off this prejudice vendetta for investigating more and finding a definitive theory of human sexuality. Thanks for your attention.